I'm going to be shamelessly and tell you I am a huge fan of my nephew, Rob Sherry. Rob grew up in Vero Beach, Florida. He was state ranked in tennis as a child. He competed in several Ironman competitions. He was voted most likely to succeed out of a class of 590 in high school. He went to West Point. His extracurricular activities at West Point was not beer drinking. He was a triathlon captain. Boy's got muscles in his hair. For extracurricular, he went through SEER training, survival, evasive, resistance, escape. Was not a walk in the park. He went to air assault school. He's an airborne ranger. He served in 82nd Airborne Division. He served in Afghanistan first as a fire support officer and then as a platoon leader. He currently is a leadership advisor to CEOs and boards of Fortune 100 companies. He's a great guy. He's a proud husband of Whitney. His beautiful wife is sitting right there. And two great sons, Luke and Griffin. So I give you my favorite nephew so far today, Rob Sherry. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Uncle John. If you're anything like me, you don't like it to make anything about yourself, so I'm glad that part's over. I'm going to share, some of my story about my service in Afghanistan and in the Army in general, and I'm going to talk about the journey to get there too. I think that's probably just as important as my experience in Afghanistan and in the service was kind of the path I took to get there. I served in a post 9/11, all volunteer force, and we all wanted to get into the fight until we got into the fight, and then some of us wanted to not be in the fight anymore, so myself included. And I'll get to that. This is a picture of me on the right, and then our best squad leader in our company, this guy's Staff Sergeant Scotty Hamrick, and we're up there in Ghazni Province, Afghanistan, in the summer of 2012. That was an outpost that we partner with the Afghan police force on, running patrols out of there, and I'll get to, again, that service here in just a minute. I'd be remiss if I didn't just thank Uncle John for inviting me, and I've been to a handful of these meetings. What you all have here in this community, how you support one another is really fabulous, and I think my generation has a lot to learn from you all, how you support one another, what you do for Atlanta and for Georgia at large. It's inspiring, and so thank you all for your service and your continued service. I think I've got a clicker here with that. Again, we'll get to the Afghanistan bit here in a minute, but this is a great shot, I think, just from, we're running an operation out of our outpost at 7,000 feet in the middle of the night, getting ready to go take the fight to the enemy, to the Taliban. So that's where we're headed. Before we get there, though, I'm going to give you just a little bit of my background. As Uncle John alluded to, I was born and raised in Vero Beach, Florida. Like most young boys, played a lot of sports, as he mentioned, some of them fairly competitively. That's me on the left there at a tennis tournament, and then I'm on the right in the middle in the green outfit. As Uncle John mentioned, I've got boys 6 and 4 now, so to look at these old photos of me at that age is that's pretty special and brings back a lot of memories. But I did sports. I was quickly drawn into kind of service. It became very obvious to me early on in my life that I was living a pretty privileged life and was better off than some of those that were around me. And so through my church, I got involved in going on mission trips, on Habitat for Humanity. Certainly did church things like Bible study and youth group and so forth. But faith and service were kind of a part of my DNA from the get-go. My grandfathers both flew in World War II. Obviously, John Butler served. My dad also served during the Vietnam era. So service was part of my country, or part of my family. Serving your country was part of my family's kind of tradition, and I was certainly drawn to do that from an early age. I also had a buddy of mine who I played sports with, who went to West Point a couple years ahead of me, and the stories I heard from him just about how special that place was, it sort of seemed like the obvious place for me to go. And once I kind of toured the campus end of my junior year of high school, I kind of knew straight away that that's where I wanted to go and learn to be a leader and hopefully serve in the Army after that. It's that is West Point. That's George Washington on his horse in front of Washington Hall, the cadet chapel up on the hill. It's one of my favorite photos of the academy. Such a special, unique place. And I went there, as I mentioned at the outset here. Post 9/11, I started there in 2006, graduated in 2010. And all of us who went there were excited and chomping at the bit to go serve our country and serve in the global war on terror, either in Iraq or Afghanistan. So everything we did there was kind of built around that mission set. There's a saying at the academy: much of the history we teach was made by the people we taught. And so it was, I think that's sort of an inspiring saying, but the point is, MacArthur and Patton and some of these folks were, General Eisenhower, some of these generals that we were learning about from a tactical and from a leadership perspective, we were following in their footsteps. There's General MacArthur there. In his last speech to the U.S. Corps cadets, he had this famous, the motto of West Point is "Duty, Honor, Country," and he had this famous speech. If you haven't seen it, please look it up on YouTube. It's just wonderful. Send chills down your spine just about what it means to be of service, be a team leader, and then ultimately be an officer in the military. And I'll just read for you one or two of the lines here. He said, "Duty, honor, country. Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be. They are your rallying points. To build courage when courage seems to fail, to regain faith when there seems to be little cause for faith, to create hope when hope becomes forlorn." And so, we had all these sort of guideposts and North Stars that we were digesting while we were there for our 47-month West Point experience. And that speech is, it's sort of plastered all over the academy, the barracks hallways, and you name it. We had to memorize a lot of that speech at one point in our plebe year. But again, all of us were there with the idea that we were there to serve our country and to go into combat and lead troops. A lot is made about the academic rigor, the military training, obviously, and then, of course, the athletics. For me, the sort of moral, ethical development at the academy was foundational to everything we did. It started day one, and there were just a few kind of artifacts from that part of our development that I think stand out to me. The top right is the West Point Cadet Chapel. It's just a wonderful place. I went to many a service there on Sundays. The bottom right, a cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do. And then the bottom left is an excerpt from the cadet prayer: "Make us choose the harder right over the easier wrong, and never be content with a half-truth when the whole can be won." And so, and to me that is, continually seek guidance and wisdom, either through faith, through leaders and mentors that came before you, from your peers, from your colleagues that we were downrange with, but always be pursuing that kind of that truth and never settle for the easier path forward. John mentioned a few of these things. I say summer camp a little tongue-in-cheek, but we had tryouts at West Point for some of the more selective Army schools, one of which was the high-risk Level C SEER school. It was learning survival tactics and then how to resist interrogation. And there was, I would say, I think the point of this is that we all wanted to get the hardest, most challenging training, not to have a notch on our sleeves, but to be the best prepared we could possibly be to go lead troops in combat. And so, while some of our peers did go to, kind of more true type college type internships, there was a large portion, hundreds of us that were trying out for these more selective schools, and just a handful that got to go to some of them. It was a real honor to get to go. That's me trying out there in the top left, 2 photos, 20K ruck march, 5-mile run, PT test, all in the snow, one January while I was a cadet. And that experience, I was there with Green Berets and SEALs and Rangers, and it taught me a lot about myself, SEER School that is, and about, I talk about the moral ethical development, but about coming to the aid of your fellow man in the times of greatest need. When everything in you is saying, take the safer route, you're getting shot at, hide behind the thing, don't come to the aid of your fellow soldier. You kind of have to learn to resist that in order to survive. And I learned how to do that there as a cadet. Last one on West Point, I promise. There's another MacArthur quote that I love, and that's me up there finishing a triathlon. But upon the fields of friendly strife are sown the seeds that upon other days, on other days will bear the fruits of victory. And it's just, again, everything we did there was about preparing to lead troops in combat. Even our sports was about winning. I think when you hear college football coaches talk about being in the trenches and going to war with your brothers and stuff, I always get a little bit of a chuckle. I mean, we truly sort of felt that in everything we did and everything we competed in, including triathlon. And I raced in a couple world championships, and our team did very well in the Collegiate National Triathlon Championship, where there's over 1,000 athletes from over 100 colleges across the country. Everything we did, we wanted to obviously compete and be the best in. And so I'm gonna transition to my service now in the actual Army. When we were our senior year, our first D year, as you're called, at West Point, you have the opportunity to select your branch and then the post that you're going to go to, based in large part on your class rank. And we were all, as I've mentioned several times now, chomping at the bit to get in the fight. So there was this patch chart that was constantly updated from DC out of the Pentagon that told you which units were deploying when downrange. And so we were trying to game the system through officers we knew at the academy to get to the unit that was going to be going downrange roughly when we hit our unit. And so I chose Fort Bragg and the 82nd Airborne Division. Of the 4 brigade combat teams there, they were on a constant cycle downrange. And in Afghanistan, when I graduated, it was hotter than Iraq, and they were deploying to Afghanistan quite a bit. And so that, plus just the storied history of the unit, obviously, and all the great leaders that have come out there, kind of inspired and motivated me to go to Bragg. So after graduation, I did officer basic school at Fort Sill. I was a field artillery officer. As John mentioned, I did airborne and ranger school. I met my lovely wife over there 3 days out of ranger school, and she's been with me ever since. Fortunately for me, I don't know about her. And then we did a big train up. I think when I talk to John and we catch up about our service experience, perhaps one of the differences with some of your all's experience is, we did a big train up as a unit. You had to get certified as a brigade to go downrange. So very rarely was anyone just showing up and getting shipped off. You had to qualify as an individual, as a squad, as a platoon, a company, battalion, brigade, and then you could deploy. And so we did that. It culminated with some very realistic training at the Joint Readiness Training Center in Fort Polk, Louisiana. Lovely place. We were doing mounted and dismounted patrols. You're getting evaluated and graded the whole time. If your unit messes something up, you have to go back and do it again. We did a lot of what I did downrange was, I say it a little tongue-in-cheek, winning the hearts and minds, but we had to do a lot of key leader engagements And, as a young lieutenant, I'm talking to the village elders and trying to decide, who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. And we did a lot of that training there as well, cultural training, how to use an interpreter, talk to the village elder who we don't speak the same language, and instead of looking at my interpreter, for instance, how to have security in such a way that was still pulling security for us and not terribly threatening for them, to try to create as comfortable as an environment as we could. But we learned a lot of that stuff and obviously refined the the tactics, techniques, and procedures once we were downrange. That guy on the top right, he was then Major Brown. He pinned my Ranger tab. That's at Ranger graduation. He went on to command as a full colonel the 75th Ranger Regiment. He's now 1-star general. He's been in and out of JSOC. He was the first captain, so the highest ranking cadet of his West Point class. And he was one of my mentors. He was an instructor when I was at the academy. He was one of my mentors and guys who I really looked up to. He was a strong leader. He was humble. He took care of, us cadets. He was honest, transparent, told us how it really was, and obviously set a great example. And so, he'll be a 4-star general. I think anyone who's ever come in contact with him, that's pretty clear. But so it was a huge honor for him to pin my Ranger tab, and he happened to be at the regiment at the time. So he was there at Fort Benning, and he just, it was local for him down the street. I guess the last thing on here is the Joint Fires course. So again, field artillery officer. A lot of what I did downrange, in addition to leading dismounted patrols, was calling in close air support through different airframes with our joint service partners. And so Nellis, as many of you would know, is out in next to Las Vegas. And I went down there for a couple of weeks and did a joint course just to learn from our joint partners and better understand my role downrange. That's me, top left. In the middle, we were going on a dismounted patrol. We were in Ghazni, as it says there. And our mission ostensibly was to clear 6 villages of the Taliban, and then build up some capacity, bring in the engineers to help build some health clinics and schools and just kind of some infrastructure. When we got there, there were some allied partners who were enabling a pretty permissive operating environment for the Taliban, we'll say. And so they kind of ruled the day, and they were shocked when we showed up. And it was there was a lot of fighting initially. There was fighting throughout the deployment, but especially initially as they got used to not just being able to pay off the allied forces, but the U.S. troops were there now, and we weren't gonna stand for it. So it was very busy immediately as soon as we got there. I was on an outpost with, there were 2 companies total there. We had the battalion headquarters was there. Some of our Air Force JTACs were there. So the guys I partnered with in calling in close air support, they'd come on some of the missions with us. Sometimes I would do it, and they would be back in the operations center, back on the outpost. But we're at 7,000 feet. Ghazni is on the eastern part of Afghanistan near the Pakistan-Afghanistan border. And, you could kind of see that the Taliban in the villages could see us coming from a mile away, whether we were mounted or dismounted. So obviously we did some night operations, and you saw the helicopter picture a minute ago where we'd kind of fly in the middle of the night and surprise them just before dawn, and that worked some of the time. The picture on the top right is some of my platoon. We were going out on a mission, dismounted, with your rucksack. The soldier on the leftmost of that right photo with the tan, that's a medic bag. So he was our medic, and he's wearing that on top of his rucksack, top of his plate carrier, full load of ammo, and of course his weapon system. He's got easily over 100 pounds on his back. And we were going out for a week-long mission. We would go out in the villages, take over a kalat, which is like a mud hut, sometimes pay the people that owned the Colot, keep them there with us. We would provide security and food and stuff for them. And then when we ultimately left, usually they would fall at the hands of the Taliban. Unfortunately, huge moral dilemmas for us, but it was something we dealt with while we were there. This is, we partnered. There was a big push when I was there to have an Afghan solution to an Afghan problem. And so we partnered with the Afghan police force, and the Afghan solution in our case, as it affected us and our missions, was to have them on the front of a patrol and be the first ones to enter a village, try and engage, clear the Taliban if they were there, get into the firefight. We'd pull security as sort of an outer cordon, and then we'd come in if needed, if called upon. In practice, that didn't work out so well for many reasons. But these are some of those guys that I partner with. The guy in the top left in that hot red, hot pink jumpsuit is the police captain who I partnered with. And he and I were the same age. We were 25. And right before we'd gotten there, both his parents had been killed from the Taliban, as well as his siblings. And he was bloodthirsty and out for revenge. And it made our jobs pretty challenging. He would race off into the villages and get into firefights with the Taliban, and then come racing out of the villages with one of their bodies draped over that little motorcycle he's got in that middle picture. So we would plan a mission for days, and how we're going to very selectively, with precision, go into a village and try to talk to the key leaders. And then he would just take matters into his own hands and kind of go in there and do that. And it's a very, very challenging operating environment. This is a Chinook who I think probably many of you have flown on and did fly on. There was like a brigade or even maybe a headquarters element even higher than that who had a photographer attached to the unit who came down to take. We had some big operations going on, I think, at this time, and this is on my outpost. That's my platoon loading up into the Chinook. I'm one of those guys there. As you can see, there's basically no light pollution, so to speak. And we would take off from our outpost. We would kind of do a rehearsal all day. We'd eat some chow. We'd make sure our kit was ready. The NCOs would make sure the guys were squared away. And then we'd have some period of time, usually an hour or two to ourselves. I was often saying some prayers and just trying to get my mind right for the mission we're going to be going on. And then we'd take off in the middle of the night. Depending on the mission, we'd either go right into a kinetic operation and try to engage with the Taliban in the middle of the night. Obviously, we have night vision goggles. They do not, and prefer to fight them in the middle of the night if we can. If for one reason or another we weren't able to do that, we would often infill, offset, sometimes as much as 5 kilometers from the village that we were going to go clear. And then, just before the sun was coming up, we would go into the village and try to clear the Taliban at that time. But that's a cool shot. I just, of all the ones, I think that one and the first one I showed with the Chinook on a different mission is just it was always this peaceful moment just before we went out on a patrol. And I always try to pause and just really kind of be present and not allow too many outside thoughts to get in, but really just be crystal clear on what the mission was and what we were setting out to do so I could do the best job, make the best decisions I could. These are just a few photos I snapped on patrol. The top left is obviously some camels. We had a couple different outposts that we would call in close air support from on different targets in the district that I was in. And one day we went up to one of the outposts, and one of the camels had stepped on a pressure plate IED that the Taliban had laid there for us because they kind of figured out where we were calling in close air support from. And so, you know, you get a little bit of dark humor going on deployment. And this was after, so the cam was blown up when I showed up one morning to go to the outpost. He took a bullet for me. And I was on a patrol here a few days later and saw some more camels, and so I snapped that photo. The bottom left photo is just that's an example of going into a village and trying to figure out who was a good guy and who was a bad guy. Obviously, no one was wearing uniforms. Some of the guys we would know because we would have spoken to before, some we did not. On one or two occasions, these scenarios where we went up to engage with some of the men in the village, it would lead to a firefight as they kind of pulled out an AK from under their outfits there, and then they'd engage us, and then kind of all hell would break loose. The bottom right was a fighting position for the Taliban, and that was to keep the animals out, that little door thing they've got there. And then you can see the women and children on the top right. This is back to the squad leader, Staff Sergeant Hamrick, who is, he just had a profound impact on me. The way he led soldiers, I was a young lieutenant. He'd had 4 or 5 deployments at that point. I was, like all good young lieutenants, I was leaning heavily on my squad leaders and platoon sergeant to square me away, teach me how things should get done, what it meant to take care of the troops. And he was the best we had and just taught me a lot. So I was glad to include him in this. That's me and my platoon sergeant, one of the senior NCOs, Sergeant First Class Stoddard, and then I'm on the right. Obviously, we were just killing time on the outpost. We'd do workouts. We were running operations pretty much consistently all the time. The only thing you could really do, there's no TV, no electronics. We didn't have a dining facility, so we were eating MREs for months on end, and just to kill time, we would, lift heavy stuff, whatever we could find on the outpost. And that's my wife over there, and my dad as well. Coming home, we came home as a unit. I think that's one of the differences to many of you all from what I understand. I got off an airplane at Fort Bragg, got off, marched in formation into one of the pack sheds where we would put on our parachutes for jumps. And I'll show you a photo here in just a second of who was waiting for us just outside. But it was a shocker to the system, needless to say, but I think we had a hero's welcome coming home. And my family was able to be there, then girlfriend, now wife of 10 years, was able to be there. And so I think that definitely helped with the reintegration. That's John Butler in the top right with the Welcome Home Heroes sign. Whitney's in there, my mom, Aunt Susie, my sisters, Whitney, and my nephew. But we came home, again, to a real hero's welcome, and I remember having, I think it beats the alternative of coming back and not having a hero's welcome. I definitely felt, it felt strange to me. We had done what we'd done. We lost soldiers while we were overseas, obviously, and had many injured. But to come home and to be called a hero, and I don't know if that resonates with any of you all, but even today, it's it feels weird to hear that. But I was glad for John to get to be there. I know it was not the reception that some of you all received, but to have him there and then have my family there was really incredible. And I'll transition here just a little bit. I came home. I served 5 total years in the Army. I came home and I was a bit at a inflection point in my life. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next, if I wanted to stay in, continue to serve, or get out. Whitney was in medical school and then pediatrics residency in Chapel Hill, so just up the road from Fayetteville where I was stationed. I was really struggling with, my experiences. And so I struggled for, probably 2 years and ultimately decided to get out. I went and got an MBA at Duke, and I, you call it PTSD, you call it whatever you want to call it, but I knew that something wasn't right. I was struggling. When I went to get my MBA at Duke, I ended up serving as the Duke Armed Forces Association co-president. We had about 80 vets there in the grad schools that all served in the different services, and most of whom were combat vets. And it was helpful to be with them, to have community with them. And then I went, Whitney and I went to a Durham Bulls baseball game, and they had fireworks at the end of it, and I was 2 years home at that point probably. They had fireworks at the end of it, and I had to race out of there. I remember she and I'll never forget running out of there, going to the parking lot, getting in the car, turning on the radio as loud as we could, because I just couldn't stand the sound, the loud noises and the sounds. So I knew something was definitely up at that point, and I think she nudged and gently encouraged me to talk to somebody about it. I went through the Durham VA. They had a PTSD clinic that was super helpful to me, and that was my first experience with talking to somebody about what I'd seen, what I'd gone through, how I was struggling. We did some really neat, in hindsight, neat. It was difficult at the time, but some different exposure therapy where I learned to sit in uncomfortable situations and just be, whether that was an empty parking lot, after dark, and sit there. I was in a safe place, well-lit place, of course. Sit with my back to the door in a restaurant. Be in a crowded room. Not feel claustrophobic, like I had to get out of there immediately. But there was a lot of these, and the therapist was very gentle with me. But it probably changed in many ways, started a different trajectory of my life. Because even to this day, I go to therapy every single week to talk to a therapist. Every Wednesday morning, 8:30 to 9:30, I'm there, kind of no matter what, unless maybe I'm on the road for work. And so I just, anyone I talk to, my fellow vets, whenever we're chatting about some of this stuff, I always just encourage them, just go talk to someone if you feel like even if you don't feel like you need it. I often start my sessions with my therapist saying, I don't know what we're going to talk about today. And then, an hour later, I found out that I had a lot to share with her, and she had some wisdom and insights for me. And I'll just close with this. I've got a beautiful life today. John mentioned I've got, Luke and Griffin are my two boys up there on the left. They're just sweethearts, great young boys. And then Whitney's in the middle. We were on a ski trip out to Colorado together there. And then my good buddy Jimmy Fisher in the top right, who I co-led the Duke Armed Forces Association with. So I've got a great life today. As John mentioned, I'm a leadership advisor to CEOs with Russell Reynolds Associates. I do executive recruiting, assessment and selection of them for senior positions, and then we do coaching as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to y'all for some Q&A. Here, you can use this.
Let's do it in this order. First, Rob, on behalf of the AVVBA, thank you so much for your words. As you know, I'm also an Academy graduate, so I could identify with a lot of that stuff. I went through SEER training, but in the Coast Guard, that just means how to survive in more than 6 feet of water. On behalf of the AVVBA, you heard Bob Babcock talking about the books that we've written. This is one of them. Wonderful. Okay, you'll need therapy after you read it, for sure, and a challenge coin.
Perfect.
On our behalf. And now, questions and answers. Thank you again.
Yeah, thank you all.
That had to be from the heart. We felt it.
Yeah, I have a grandson that was 2013. You were one of his firsties, I guess. Right? Did you ever run across Ben Ketchum? Ketchum?
That name doesn't ring a bell, but it's possible we ran across one another.
Yeah, well, he was a ranger, airborne, ski patrol, all that kind of stuff.
That's
and his
great.
brother was in 14.
Awesome. He must be very proud.
Yeah, he's an Army surgeon.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Yes, sir.
So I have a question. When you're doing the combined operations with the Afghans, and they go into the village first, and then they get into a firefight, how difficult was it to coordinate going in behind them and not killing the friendlies and not, I mean, some of us did some of that same kind of thing in Vietnam.
Yeah, of course.
And it was always really kind of iffy.
Yeah.
In those situations anyway, so how'd you guys do it?
Yeah, it was also iffy, I would say. It was challenging for sure. I mean, fortunately they wore uniforms that helped identify who they were and where they were. And usually they would, there weren't a lot of tactics despite our best efforts to help train them. There weren't a lot of tactics. And so they would kind of mass on, one objective together, and it was kind of easy to find where everybody was. So fortunately we didn't have any issues. But yeah, you definitely hesitated a bit going into the village after that. And sometimes, I'd call up to my commander, who remains a good friend, company commander, and I would let him know what was going on, and he would just say, let him duel it out, essentially. And then we would, it wasn't worth it to risk our guys. So we did that sometimes as well.
Right.
Before we went in.
Right.
Other questions?
Hi, my name is Rick White, and this is not a question. This is a thank you. I, like many in this room, served several tours in Vietnam. I was an infantryman. Every time I get a chance to thank an artilleryman, I thank them. Because without what you guys did for us, calling in danger close when we're about to be overrun, I wouldn't be here today. My second tour, I took command of a company from the artillery FO because the company commander had been killed. So I just want to say from my heart, every chance I get, I don't ever kid about branches, by the way. I say, thank you, sir, for being a great artilleryman, for saving our lives in Vietnam. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. I feel the same way about all of the branches as well. I don't make jokes, and I appreciate you saying that. And then, I'm not a big war story guy, as you can probably tell. I skipped over a lot of that stuff. But, we were, the Air Force pilots that we had on station, and there were several times for sure where A-10s saved our lives when we were pinned down in an open field and things like that. 100% would not be standing here without the A-10s and the Apaches, the H-64s from the Army pilot side. So I agree wholeheartedly. It took a team effort. Thank you for your words.
Okay. I don't have a question, but I want to say something to you. I was started off as an artilleryman too. Unfortunately, they ran short of infantry captains when I got to Vietnam, so I did that with the infantry and then came back and did a tour with the artillery. There are a lot of people in this room that qualify for that hero definition, a lot of them, if not all of them, but I understand the discomfort. What I really admired about what you said is that everybody's glad to admit that they're drawing disability for one reason or another, if it relates to a wound, if it relates to cancer that they protracted from Agent Orange, but very few of us are willing to step forward and admit. It took me 30 years to admit, because I could never sleep at night for 30 years.
Yeah.
I have to sleep during the daytime. It took me 30 years to admit I was suffering from something that I didn't have before I went there, and it was PTSD. It takes real courage to be willing to admit that, because it almost to us as fighting men, it sounds like a weakness. It's not a weakness to admit it. It's a great strength, and I admire you for being willing to do that. I went through all those therapies, and finally the only therapy that worked was saying a bunch of prayers before I went to sleep every night. That worked for me. So thank you for admitting that, because most warriors don't want to talk about it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. I mean, if I can just add to that, I mentioned it before, but I mean, I wouldn't probably, I don't want to say this for sure, but there's a good chance I wouldn't be here if I hadn't, at some point raised my hand and started opening my mouth. And what you realize is, once you do that, you kind of build it up to be this big thing. But once you do that, it becomes second nature. And it's some of the toughest guys I know, much tougher than myself, talk to someone regularly, whether it's, a community of fellow veterans or it's a trained psychologist or therapist. Like I said, I do it weekly, and it's one of the highlights of my week every week. And I often, as I said, tell my therapist, I don't have anything to talk about. Life's good. I'm rough and tough. I can make it. I don't need your help. That's kind of my approach. Even though I just saw her 7 days before, said the same thing, and walked out of there like the weight of the world had been lifted off my shoulders. So I just encourage anybody who thinks they may benefit from that to just go ahead and do it.
You and I have not talked about this, so I want to ask you, on behalf of all of us, if you're willing to share this. One of the things we share is our government basically let us down at the end of our tour, at the end of our service. I wonder how much of, if you don't mind sharing, if you don't, it's okay, how much of what you struggle with today, how much of what you get therapy for, is because of the abandonment of our government for the soldiers who served.
Yeah, I think there was probably a time where I was very angry about it. I mean, you don't have to, I'm not an expert on how to exfil a country, but what we did with Afghanistan, I think we could all agree probably wasn't the best approach. So, there was a time where I was, I find in general that being angry does not serve me well. I run hot, I react, I respond, quickly. And on that, I certainly there would have been a time where I would have. But, that, to me, where I have found some peace is realizing that a lot of that's out of my control, and politicians are going to do what politicians do on both sides of the aisle. And all I can do is take care of myself, how I respond and interact with the world. And so I've found peace in that, knowing that it was out of my hands. Being angry and worked up about it doesn't really serve me well, and in fact only makes me, things worse for me. So, and that sounds like a mature answer. I think it probably is an evolved answer and not one I would have given you even just a few years ago. But I do think talking through with someone about how I feel about things, what's actually in my control, what's not. I'm like all of us. I like to think the world revolves around me, and like I want it to respond to my every whim and want, but it just doesn't do that. And so, anyway, that's how I've made peace with all that. But that's a great question, John.
Rob, once again, thank you so very much.
Thanks, Art.
Really great getting to know you too.
Yeah.